Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I work in an office with a guy I'll call Jake. Jake is that coworker everyone knows. Lazy, always passing his work on to someone else, and somehow always getting away with it. When he's not scrolling through TikTok at his desk, he's taking his fourth quick break of the morning. He's the type who'll stroll in at 9:45, mumble something about crazy construction on I-95, and then vanish for a mysteriously long lunch meeting that no one else seems to be attending. Since last September, Jake has made me his go-to person for dumping work. Hey, could you take a quick look at this? He'll message on Teams, which really means, please do this entire project while I take all the credit. I've brought this up with Maria, our team lead, but Jake always has some smooth explanation ready. Oh, I was actually mentoring them through the process, he'd say with that annoying smirk of his. The last straw came when he messaged me at 4:45 p.m. about a critical quarterly analysis due to our biggest client in just 2 days. Listen, he said, leaning over my cubicle wall one morning. I'm really swamped with the Johnson account. Could you help me out? It'll only take an hour, tops. I looked up from my screen. Sure, Jake. Quick question, though. How comfortable are you with Excel? Some of these formulas can get tricky. He waved dismissively. Oh, I get by. Just the basics. Perfect. The next time Jake tried to offload a stack of spreadsheets for his upcoming presentation, I agreed with unusual enthusiasm. No problem at all. Happy to help a teammate out. But this time, I carefully embedded a series of hidden formulas throughout the documents. Nothing too obvious, just enough to subtly alter the numbers if someone didn't know to check for hidden cells. The real magic happened whenever Jake would try to copy and paste the data into his presentation. The numbers would shift just enough to make everything meaningless. On presentation day, Jake spent the morning chatting with the new intern about his weekend plans, confident that I had everything handled. When the client called, furious about the nonsensical data in their report, Jake's face went pale. I don't understand, he muttered, frantically clicking through the spreadsheets at his desk. These numbers were fine yesterday. He practically ran to my desk. Something's wrong with the spreadsheets, I put on my most concerned face. Really? That's weird. Maybe it's a Microsoft 365 update issue? They just rolled out some changes last week. Can you fix it? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. I'm actually slammed with the Morgan project right now, I replied, mirroring his usual excuses. Have you tried clearing the cache? Maria called him into her office later that afternoon. Through the glass walls, I could see Jake gesturing desperately, but for once, his smooth talk wasn't working. He left with a 2-week unpaid suspension and a final warning. These days, Jake's surprisingly efficient at managing his own workload. The next one is an entitled people story. What happened to me over the past 8 months still feels surreal, like something out of a bad movie. But I have all the documentation to prove it really happened, and I need to share this story to warn others about protecting their property rights. It all started last May when I inherited a vacant lot from my grandfather. The lot is in a nice suburban area about 30 minutes from where I live. Grandpa had bought it as an investment property back in the 1970s, but never ended up building on it. He just paid the taxes and kept it maintained, figuring it would appreciate in value over time. He was right. That area has developed a lot over the decades, and the lot is worth quite a bit now. I had mixed feelings about inheriting it. On one hand, it was a valuable piece of property. On the other hand, it meant dealing with property taxes and maintenance. I decided to hold on to it for a while and figure out what to do later. Maybe build my dream home there eventually, or sell it when the market was right. The lot is at the end of a cul-de-sac, bordered by houses on either side. I drove by every couple of weeks to check on it and make sure everything was okay. Nothing exciting ever happened, until that day in August when I pulled up and saw construction equipment on my property. I literally did a double take. There was a concrete foundation being poured for what looked like a decent-sized garage or workshop. My heart started racing as I parked my car and jumped out to investigate. A couple of construction workers were there and they looked confused when I approached them. Excuse me, what's going on here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite my rising anger. One of the workers, a middle-aged guy in a hard hat, replied, We're building a detached garage. Should take about 3 weeks to complete. Who authorized this construction? I demanded. The homeowner, Karen Mitchell, at 425 Pine Circle, he said, gesturing to the house next door. She's got all the permits lined up. I felt my blood pressure rising. This is my property. I inherited it from my grandfather. No one had permission to build anything here. The workers exchanged worried glances. The first guy pulled out his phone and called someone, walking away to have a hushed conversation. The other worker awkwardly avoided eye contact with me. A few minutes later, a woman with highlighted blonde hair came storming out of the house next door. She marched right up to me with an annoyed expression. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked in a condescending tone. "The problem is you're building a garage on my property without permission," I said firmly. She laughed dismissively. "Oh, honey, I think you're confused. This is my land. I bought it from the city last year." "No, you absolutely did not. I inherited this lot from my grandfather, Thomas Miller. I have all the paperwork to prove it." Her face tightened. "Well, I have permits for this construction. Everything is properly filed with the city." "Show me," I challenged. She hesitated. "I don't have to show you anything. This is my property and I'll build whatever I want on it." "Stop work immediately," I told the construction crew. "I'm calling my lawyer and the police." "Don't you dare interfere with my construction project," Karen snapped. "I'll sue you for damages if you delay this." I pulled out my phone and called the police while Karen continued ranting about her permits and threatening legal action. When I mentioned getting my lawyer involved, she stomped back to her house and slammed the door. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. I showed them my deed and property documents on my phone. They told the construction crew to halt work until ownership could be verified. Karen refused to come out of her house to talk to the officers. I immediately called my family's lawyer, Jim Patterson, who had handled my grandfather's estate. He was as shocked as I was about the situation. He advised me to file for an emergency injunction to stop construction and said he'd start investigating how this happened. What we discovered over the next few days was infuriating. Karen had indeed filed for building permits, but she had deliberately misrepresented the property lines on her application. She claimed my lot was part of her property and submitted altered documents to support it. The city employee processing the permit request hadn't cross-referenced property records thoroughly enough to catch the discrepancy. Jim filed for an emergency hearing and we got a temporary restraining order halting any further construction. Karen was forced to appear in court, where her story kept changing. First, she claimed she thought it was her property. Then she said she thought it was unused city land. Finally, she admitted she knew it was privately owned, but assumed an absentee owner would never notice or care about her small garage. The judge was not impressed. He made it very clear that her actions constituted willful trespassing and fraud. He ordered her to remove all construction materials and restore the property to its original condition at her expense. But Karen wasn't done fighting. She filed appeal after appeal, trying to delay the inevitable. She claimed financial hardship. She claimed adverse possession, which was laughable since she'd only lived there 3 years. She even tried to argue that my grandfather had verbally agreed to let her use the land. He'd passed away before she even moved to the neighborhood. Meanwhile, that ugly concrete foundation sat there collecting water. Jim advised me to document everything meticulously. I took photos and videos showing the damage to my property. I got statements from other neighbors about Karen's history of entitled behavior. One elderly couple told me she'd tried to claim part of their backyard as hers by moving their fence while they were on vacation. The legal battle dragged on through the fall. Karen seemed to think if she made it difficult enough, I'd give up and let her have her way. But I was determined to stand my ground. This wasn't just about a garage anymore. It was about holding someone accountable for their blatant disregard of others' property rights. In November, we finally got a decisive ruling from the judge. Not only did Karen have to remove all construction materials and restore my property, she was ordered to pay substantial fines for submitting fraudulent permit applications. She also had to pay my legal fees and damages for trespassing and property damage. This court takes a very dim view of attempting to appropriate private property through deception, the judge said sternly. The defendant's actions show a pattern of willful disregard for property rights and abuse of the permitting process. Karen's face was bright red as the judgment was read. She refused to look at me or her lawyer. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction seeing her finally face consequences for her actions. But even then, she tried to drag her feet on compliance. The court had given her 30 days to remove the foundation and restore the property. Day 30 came and went with no action from her. Jim immediately filed a motion for contempt of court. The judge was not pleased to see Karen back in his courtroom. This time, he gave her an ultimatum: complete the restoration within 10 days, or face daily fines of $1,000 plus possible jail time for contempt. That finally got through to her. 2 days later, a demolition crew arrived to break up and remove the concrete foundation. It took them 3 days to completely clear the site and bring in fresh topsoil. Karen had to pay for new grass to be planted to restore the lot to its original condition. The total cost to Karen ended up being over $50,000 when all was said and done. Legal fees, fines, demolition, restoration, and damages. Far more than a garage would have cost if she'd built it legally on her own property. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she had to take out a second mortgage to pay for everything. What amazes me most about this whole ordeal is her sheer audacity. Who builds a structure on someone else's land thinking they'll just get away with it? The level of entitlement is staggering. When I talked to other neighbors, I learned this wasn't out of character for her. She had a long history of pushing boundaries and trying to take advantage of people. "She's been a nightmare ever since she moved in," said Bob, who lives across the street. "Always complaining about everyone else's properties while doing whatever she wants with no regard for rules or neighbors. Remember when she tried to force the HOA to make everyone paint their houses the same color as hers?" his wife Janet added. She claimed it would improve property values, but really she just wanted to control everything. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about property ownership and dealing with difficult people. First, document everything and know your rights. Second, don't back down when someone tries to bully you. They count on people giving up. Third, get a good lawyer who knows how to navigate the system. I also learned a lot about the importance of being proactive about protecting your property. After this incident, I installed security cameras on the lot and put up clear property line markers. Jim helped me register a formal complaint about the city employee who approved Karen's fraudulent permits without proper verification. The city has since implemented stricter procedures for checking property boundaries on permit applications. These days, things are quiet on the lot. The grass has grown back nicely, and there's no trace of Karen's attempted garage grab. She still lives next door, but seems to go out of her way to avoid me when I come by to check on the property. I've noticed she's become much less confrontational with other neighbors, too. Maybe losing thousands of dollars and being publicly exposed as a fraud finally taught her some humility. I'm actually grateful in a way that this happened. It forced me to take a more active interest in the property and think about its future. I've started working with an architect to design my dream home for the lot. Construction should start next spring, with all proper permits and documentation, of course. As for Karen, last I heard, she's trying to sell her house and move away. Apparently, living next to the empty lot she tried to steal is too much for her wounded pride. Can't say I'll miss her when she's gone. The whole neighborhood seems relieved that someone finally stood up to her and won. Several people have thanked me for not backing down. It's nice to know that sometimes justice prevails, and entitled people don't always get their way. Jim tells me this case will probably be used as an example in local real estate law courses of what not to do. He's already had other lawyers contact him about similar cases where property owners tried to expand their boundaries through deception. "Your case sets a strong precedent," he told me recently. "The judge's ruling makes it clear that courts won't tolerate deliberate property theft through permit fraud. The penalties were harsh enough to discourage others from trying the same thing." I hope sharing this story helps other property owners protect themselves. Don't assume everyone will respect property lines and legal boundaries. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight back when someone tries to take what's yours. And if you encounter your own Karen trying to steal your land, get a good lawyer and prepare for battle. The victory will be worth it. Oh, and one final detail that makes this whole thing even more ridiculous. I found out later that Karen's existing property was actually big enough for a garage. She just didn't want to cut down her precious ornamental cherry trees to build it. So instead of sacrificing her trees, she tried to steal my land. The entitlement is just mind-boggling. But hey, at least her cherry trees are safe. Too bad about that second mortgage, though. Karma really does come back around sometimes. Update. 6 months later. I thought you all might appreciate an update on the garage saga. A lot has happened since my original post, and I'm happy to report that karma has continued to work its magic. Remember how Karen was trying to sell her house? Well, that didn't go quite as planned for her. Turns out that when you're legally required to disclose pending litigation and judgments against your property, potential buyers get nervous. Who knew? Her first real estate agent quit after learning about all the legal drama. The second one managed to get a few showings, but as soon as buyers did their due diligence and found out about the fraudulent permit incident, they ran for the hills. Nobody wanted to risk buying a property with an owner known for boundary disputes and permit fraud. Karen tried to blame me for sabotaging her sale by not taking down my security cameras and property markers. She actually had her new lawyer send me a letter demanding I remove them because they were creating an unwelcoming atmosphere and reducing her property value. Jim, my lawyer, got a good laugh out of that one. His response letter basically said, "Nice try, but no." The cameras stayed up, and they proved useful sooner than expected. About 2 months ago, they caught Karen's teenage son and his friends sneaking onto my property at night to spray paint obscenities on my survey stakes. Not very creative, but definitely illegal. I took the footage straight to the police. They had a nice chat with Karen and her son about criminal trespassing and vandalism. No charges were filed since it was a first offense, but they had to pay for cleaning and replacing the damaged stakes. More importantly, the police made it very clear that any future incidents would be prosecuted fully. Karen's son was apparently grounded for months, and she had to explain to her ex-husband why their son was in trouble with the police. From what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, that conversation did not go well for her. But the real karma came through the city's investigation of the permit fraud. Remember how I mentioned filing a complaint about the city employee who approved Karen's fraudulent permits? Well, that led to a broader audit of the permit office. They discovered that Karen had connections in the permit office. Specifically, her cousin worked there and had helped push through her fraudulent application without proper verification. Both the cousin and his supervisor were fired, and the city implemented new anti-nepotism policies for permit processing. The city also revised their whole permit application system. Now they require detailed surveys and multiple levels of property record verification before approval. Several of my neighbors have thanked me because apparently it's made it much harder for people to get away with shady construction projects. As for my property, construction on my new house starts next month. The architect designed an amazing modern home that will fit perfectly on the lot. And yes, we've triple-checked all property lines and have every permit properly documented. Karen still hasn't managed to sell her house, even after dropping the price 3 times. She's become a bit of a local cautionary tale. People literally point out her house to visitors while telling the story of her failed land grab. The cherry trees she was so desperate to protect? They got damaged in a storm last month. The irony of losing them after all the trouble she went through to keep them has not been lost on anyone. I've had several neighbors tell me they're glad I fought back against her behavior. Apparently she had been gradually pushing boundaries and bullying people for years, but nobody wanted to deal with the confrontation of standing up to her. You showed us all that it's worth fighting back against entitled people, Janet from across the street told me. This neighborhood is so much more peaceful now that she's learned she can't just do whatever she wants. Even Karen seems to have finally accepted defeat. I saw her actually apologize to another neighbor last week when her dog got into their yard, something the old Karen would never have done. So I guess the moral of this update is that sometimes standing your ground not only protects you, but helps your whole community. Fighting entitlement and fraud is worth it, even when it's difficult. And if you're thinking about building something on someone else's land, remember Karen and her $50 000 plus garage that never got built. The cost of doing things legally is always cheaper than the cost of getting caught doing things wrong. Thanks for all the support on my original post. It really helped knowing I wasn't overreacting by pursuing this legally. Sometimes you have to be the one to stand up and say no to entitled behavior. The results are worth it. The next one is a malicious compliances story. Back in the early 2000s, I was collecting all my change in one of those big plastic water jugs for water dispensers. I had it about 60% full and needed to cash them in to make ends meet, so I lugged this thing into my local bank. Now, I learned the hard way prior to this that the bank would not accept pre-rolled coins. They told me there was no way to verify that the rolls contained actual coins, and that they would have to rip every one of them open to verify. After the explanation, it made sense. But it was kind of frustrating since I spent the money and time to roll all these coins up thinking I was helping them out. So, this time, I kept them all loose in the jug. I also know they have one of those coin counting machines because I seen them use it the last time, and it made light work of all the coins they had unwrapped from the rolls. But it'd been a few years since I last did this, so here I was waiting in line for the next available teller with my jug of loose change, probably weighing 40 to 50 pounds worth. When my time came, I waddled the jug up to the base of the teller desk and told them I wanted to cash it in. This is when they told me that they charged something like a 10% fee to count the change. I turned my head to the right where there was a small room, and sure enough, that same coin counting machine was sitting in there. I said, "You aren't counting it, you're just pouring it into that machine and it'll count it for you." They simply replied, "It's just our policy, sir." I then said, "You're my bank, isn't that a service you're supposed to provide to me?" And they said, "We charge the same rate for everyone." So I asked how much change they would take without charging me the fee, and they said $50. So I knelt down, tipped the jug over, and poured as much of it into my hand as possible and put a couple handfuls worth onto the counter. Looking perturbed, she counted it all by hand and gave me maybe $22 and some change. I put it into my wallet, grabbed my jug, and dragged it to the back of the line behind 2 other customers. When it was my turn again, I waddled up there, knelt down, and placed a couple handfuls of coins on the high counter. When I stood back up, you could tell she was pretty perturbed about what I was doing and eventually just gave in. She told me to bring the jug over to the swinging door at the end of the desk, and with the help of another teller, they started pouring it into the coin machine. I made the point to tell them that I knew almost to the cent how much was in there, so don't try to pull any fast ones on me. About 10 minutes later, it had chewed through all the coins, and the total came to within a few bucks of my own count. Might have had a handful of Canadian coins in there or some likely miscount due to worn coins. I remember it ended up be over $1,000 in pocket change, but I can't recall the actual total. But that was the last time I saved coins. Nowadays, I hear most banks won't do this at all and will just refer you to those coin counting machines you see at hardware stores or Walmart that rob you of a large percentage of the total. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll